where you are joining us from. I want to let you know a few things while you're settling into your seats, that we are recording this so that folks who are not able to join us tonight will have an opportunity to view this fun conversation a little bit later. And then feel free to turn on your cameras. I know sometimes when I join a webinar, I'm in like my jammies and I don't know that I want you to see my messy house. But if you'd like to, we love to see your smiling faces. So please feel free to join us on camera. We do ask that you keep your microphones muted so that we just eliminate some of that noise. And so it looks like people are settling in. Oh my gosh, we've got people from New York, from Massachusetts, from Burlington, Ontario, from Texas, somebody from Lima, Peru. We got people from all over the place. So thank you so much for joining us this evening. And in addition to letting us know where you're from and then showing your smiling faces, we would love to know, what is your favorite bird? Like if you were to pick a bird, what's your favorite bird? It's always a hard thing for me because I have a lot of favorite birds. But if you could just pick one, what's your favorite bird? All right, so folks, it looks like we're settling into our seats, getting ready for another fabulous bird book club. And again, my name is Alicia King. I am a volunteer with Environment for the Americas. I love to contribute to the conservation of birds, and Environment for the Americas allows me to do a lot of fun things with them, in addition to World Migratory Bird Day celebrations and just doing miscellaneous things. I'm able to read a bunch of really cool books and interview cool authors and spend time with you all to see if we can dive into some of the fun things that authors go through when they are writing their books, researching their books, and then finally publishing their books. So I am going to take us into a quick presentation just to make sure, and those of you who have joined us on a regular basis know that know who Environment for the Americas is. But for those of you that are joining us for the first time, or maybe don't know exactly who Environment for the Americas is, I just want to give a quick little overview. So let me make sure that I am able to share. And it looks like Lauren, and hello, Lauren. And Lauren, it works for the Environment for the Americas, and she is our kind of behind the scenes magic person. So she makes sure everything's working and she coordinates with the authors. So thank you, Lauren. And let's try that one more time to see if I can get a share. Yep, it looks like it. All right. So again, I just want to share who Environment for the Americas is. We are really, as an organization, committed to protecting, connecting, and inspiring. And so we lead global partnerships focused on bird conservation and protecting migratory species and their habitats across international borders. Birds don't know those borders, so our ability to be able to go beyond borders is really important for bird conservation. And we really hope to nurture the next generation of conservationists through our education, outreach, and creating meaningful opportunities for people to be engaged. So it's really incredibly important for us in the work that we do. And if I can advance to the next slide, I will try to. I love it when it works. And then when it doesn't, there we go. Okay. So one of the signature programs that we have is World Migratory Bird Day. We coordinate that with our partners, and it's really the cornerstone of our conservation campaign, and it's central to so many of our other programs. And this is annual awareness raising initiative that highlights the need for conservation of migratory birds. And its global reach allows us to actually celebrate World Migratory Bird Day in the spring and the fall, and really any day can be World Migratory Bird Day. And you can certainly learn more on our website. And when I talked about opportunities to engage future generations, and we have some internship programs that really empower underrepresented early career professionals in particular We have partnerships with a lot of agencies like the Forest Service, National Park Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Bureau of Land Management, and then other organizations um, like the Audubon Society chapters and ornithological societies, anybody who really does that bird conservation work. And these offer hands-on experience and mentorship. So they're really incredibly important for getting people educated and engaged and involved in those particular careers and opportunities to do that kind of important work. We have some things coming up. We have a November webinar where we're going to kind of close out our World Migratory Bird Day ceremony stuff. And so we hope you can join us. And Lauren's going to put the link to where you can register for that into the chat and more information. But we hope you'll join us and get excited and then potentially do things in the future related to World Migratory Bird Day in your own communities. Doesn't have to be big. It can be small, and you can grow it over time and get other partners and people engaged. We also have a duck race coming up. And so the duck race focuses on bird cities. So our bird cities are specific to help people make their communities and cities and towns and campuses friendly for birds. And you can help with that. So you can have a fun duck race with us. And we're going to do that live on YouTube on December 18. You can donate money. You can support a happy kit. I was just recently in Colombia with Sue Bonfield, the director, the executive director of Environment for the Americas, and we passed out a bunch of those happy kits to schools and people who work with youth in their communities, and they really did make everybody happy. It was amazing how important those kinds of kits and programs are for so many schools. And so Colombia was a great trip. One of the best trips I think I've been on in a long time. So there are a lot of ways that you can reach out and support. And when you think about supporting and being part of the duck race, you could actually win some binoculars and then maybe give them to somebody young who doesn't have an opportunity to purchase their own binoculars. So there are a lot of different ways you can support our work. You can buy a happy packet that we can take with us when we visit Latin American cities. And it really is fun to see that. You can donate toward binoculars that we then provide to communities that might not otherwise be able to afford them. You can donate airline miles, and then you can support the internship programs, and you can just donate, but you can also go shopping. So something I really like to do is shop at Environment for the Americas because they have lots of cool products. And who doesn't like to go shopping and share the fun bird stuff? So Lauren picked out some featured products, and I don't know that I'm brave enough to wear robin socks yet, but I'm thinking about it. But there are a lot of cool things, including the owl gourd ornaments. And so all of those sales support the work that Environment for the Americas does. So we hope that you will go shopping and spend some money. So we are thinking about the 2026 Bird Book Club, and Lauren is making arrangements with a lot of authors to get them on the calendar. We're going to move our Bird Book Club to the second Thursday of the month. We've typically been the last Thursday or the third Thursday, depending on how the calendar works out. So same stuff, same process, same everything, but doing it on the second Thursday of the month. So you'll get more information about that. We'll reach out directly to you. We have some really cool authors that are coming on and some fun books. So we're not going to give them all away, but on the screen is just a little peek into what we're organizing. So we hope that you will join us. So now I want to introduce Jessica Roux to you tonight. I am super excited about having a conversation with her tonight. I'm going to let her pronounce the book so that I don't mess it up. But this illustrated guide to bird lore and symbolism was really fun to read. And she is a master at the storytelling and the illustrations. So she is a best-selling illustrator, author, and gardener. She's based in Nashville, Tennessee. I understand that her husband makes guitars. I asked him, I guess he's the musician in the family, sort of. So
Yes.
she loves exploring her own backyard and being surrounded by nature, which is how we benefit from her illustrations and her storytelling, because she uses those colors and those shapes and the things that she explores to be able to really share some of those details with us. And so the book that we're going to talk about tonight, I'm going to go ahead and try, Jessica. Um, Ornithography.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's going to explore folklore, mythology, and lots of history. And I am super excited. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hopefully everything will go away. And then I will warn everybody that I've been having some trouble with my computer lately. And so if I disappear, Jessica's going to take over and Lauren's going to help make sure everything goes smoothly. Um, so in my typical style, I have lots of questions, but first, welcome, Jessica. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and share my book with you all.
Excellent. And so did I get it right? Or do you want to tell me how to really
Pretty close.
pronounce it? Did it?
Yeah, ornithography. So I
Okay,
think it's just the
ornithography.
emphasis is a little off, but however you want to say it, I think is fine.
Okay. So my
It's a
day
challenge.
job is as the executive director of the Wisconsin Society for Ornithology.
Mhm.
And so I always, that word comes out of my mouth anytime I see the ornith. So,
I know. Even when I see it written out, I have to take a second and pause and I'm like, am I writing ornithography or am I writing ornithology? Like it's very confusing and I've confused myself many times being like, what is the actual word?
so good, it's not just me.
No.
So, and don't worry, everybody who's joining us today for the book club, we're not going to have a quiz at the end of this and ask you to pronounce the word. So, no worries. But we do want you, Jessica is going to share some slides with us, and then we're going to have a conversation with her. And so, as Jessica's sharing with us and you're hearing the conversation, if you have questions or thoughts that you have, please put them in the chat. And then I will, I'm happy to have you come on screen and ask your question, or I'm happy to ask the question myself. So just feel free to put it in the chat. Let me know that you have a question for Jessica. And then I'm going to sit back and relax a little bit so Jessica can share her magic with us. So
Well,
thank you, Jessica.
thank you so much. All right, I will start sharing my presentation. So can everyone see it? Yes. Cool.
Yes.
Okay, great. So this is my book, Ornithography, an illustrated guide to bird lore and symbolism. And I'll share a little bit behind the scenes, how I created the artwork for it, how the book came about, as well as some of my favorite birds in the book and some of the most interesting stories that I came across. But I'm looking forward to hearing everyone's questions. So definitely keep asking them as I chat with you. And so this book really came about from my first book, which is Floriography, an illustrated guide to the Victorian language of flowers. And floriography is a word that already existed, and it just means the Victorian language of flowers. And in the Victorian era, every flower had a meaning associated with it. And so, floriography was a way of communicating with like clandestine messages and, there's flowers for everything from love and romance to hatred and anger. And so it's one of my favorite topics to explore. And as I was coming up with an idea for maybe a future book, I thought it might be interesting to do a similar storytelling, but with birds, since I love birds. I love being outside in my yard. I'm a big gardener, and I think birds and flowers really go together quite well. So, as I was digging into this, there's not really a language of birds in the same way there is a language of flowers, but we can do what the Victorians did, and they assigned meanings to flowers based off the nature of the flower itself, as well as history, mythology, and folklore surrounding the plant. And, the great thing about birds is that there's so much history, mythology, and folklore behind every single bird that we see. We've been telling stories about these creatures for millennia. And so I really loved getting to dig into this. There's 100 different birds in the book, and some of my absolute favorite birds are included with their wonderful stories to tell. So I'm going to read you the introduction to the book in case you haven't read it. If not, it's a little bit of a refresher, and I've got some cool imagery to show with it that maybe will, get your mind churning and thinking about this language of birds. Oh, and this is me as a kid, a little artist. So I've been doing this for a long time. I forgot that slide was in there. That's me and my sister painting outside. I've just loved nature and, I kind of came about illustration through writing. I briefly studied journalism for a year in college and decided that wasn't for me and ended up transferring to the Savannah College of Art and Design where I studied illustration. And I always wanted to work in the book industry. I love doing book covers and things like that. But I found like I really enjoy the writing aspect of it too. That kind of never really left me. But I'm always very inspired by nature and things like that. And I love this picture of me and my sister. It's really funny wearing our dad's shirts and painting in the yard. All right, now to the introduction of ornithography. Birds have inspired us since the dawn of time. Their elegance in flight, captivating songs, and delicate mannerisms spark hope and delight. For centuries, cultures around the world have looked to birds for meaning, often relying on these creatures to teach moral lessons, illuminate history, foretell victory, or warn of doom. The divinatory observation of birds began long ago, at least as far back as ancient Greece, where ornithomancy, the interpretation of omens based on the movements and calls of birds, was integral to the culture. It paved the way for the Roman practice of augury, from which we get the terms auspicious, meaning a good omen, an inauguration, a formal ceremony that in Rome would have involved looking to the birds for signs from the gods. Augurs sought messages in how birds flew and at what height, the number of birds present, their songs, and even their eating patterns. The results of auguries were taken extremely seriously and heavily influenced Roman daily life, politics, and even military strategy. So I've got a couple images up here that are just some really fascinating imagery depicting these ancient Roman augurs. And, they were taken extremely seriously. We know how serious it is because their tools, which was called the lightus, which they would use for ornithomancy and for interpreting bird omens, was included on Roman coins. So it's such an important part of the culture that it's even appearing on their money. And I absolutely love the one with the little chickens, the black and white image there. I have chickens myself, and one of the practices was seeing how much chickens would eat, and that would foretell either a good outcome or a bad one. So oftentimes these augurs kind of knew what response they needed to have the chickens say for, political influence and things like that. They knew what message they wanted to hear, the elders wanted to hear. So you might not feed the chickens the day before, and then so they'll eat really voraciously, and then you can say, "Oh, look, they're eating so much food. That's a great sign for our military strategy. That's a great sign for re-election or something like that." And then you might feed them a lot the day before if you don't want them to eat. But I know my chickens are always up for a good snack. So, all right, back to the introduction. While augury is no longer a common practice and we don't have a language of birds as standardized as the Victorian language of flowers, we can look to folklore, mythology, and history for insight into the symbolism associated with our feathered friends. By reflecting on dozens of such sources, I have assigned meanings to 100 of my favorite birds, illustrating each one. While I've included many beloved species like the robin, sparrow, and wren, I found I'm most fond of the ugly ducklings. Birds with peculiar proportions, curious colors, and fantastic feathers. Whether universally beloved or feared, admired or mocked, I've come to believe that every bird has a story to tell. So these are all my favorite birds, which I really fell in love with while I was working on this book. I think before this, I would have said I liked, just the birds that you see at your feeder. But in doing this book and doing the research and the illustrations behind it, I just really fell in love with like ostriches and emus and rheas and they're really fascinating birds, and I think they're really beautiful. I think there's something about like their gorgeous eyelashes that is really captivating. But they're really, I just absolutely love them. I think they're fascinating and so interesting. And I'm going to share with you just a few of the stories from my book, um, especially the ones that have really good visual imagery, just because I think their stories are fun and interesting. And one I think that was the absolute most surprising meaning behind them was the flamingo. So I think we often think about flamingos as these kind of garish lawn ornament style birds. They're kind of funny looking, they're strange, but they have a very important and strong story to tell. And their meaning is survival. These iconic pink birds may explain the origin of the mythological phoenix. In Latin, flamingo comes from the Latin flamma, which means flame. And in ancient times, travelers to the Great Rift Valley in eastern Africa would occasionally see these large reddish birds through thick, steaming mists of nearly boiling volcanic lakes. The creatures were even known to drink the caustic lake water. Reports of these firebirds were passed on to the Greeks and eventually made their way throughout Europe, inspiring the tale of the phoenix, a bird said to burst into flames and then reemerge from its own ashes. So I think that's so interesting that we have such a bird that's kind of has an opposite meaning when we think about it today as something that's kind of funny and not really very serious, but these birds are survivors. And I love this antique etching of a phoenix where you can kind of see that flamingo inspiration coming into it, especially in the shape of the beak and the neck and all of that. It's very flamingo inspired, and I think that's very, very fun. And flamingos are really cool birds. If you aren't a fan of a flamingo, I think you should be. They can survive in near freezing water. If water freezes around them, it's fine. They'll survive. If it's near boiling water, also fine. So they really are super adaptable birds. They're really strong and resilient and really fascinating. One of my other favorites, I think, from the book has to be the raven. Um, I absolutely love these birds. I think they're fascinating. And this was actually one of the first illustrations I did for the book, so I'm very, very fond of it. But ravens have a meaning of intelligence. And with jet black feathers and a massive wingspan, the raven's imposing size, keen intelligence, and dark coloring set it apart from all other birds. In Norse mythology, two ravens called Hugin and Munin sit atop the shoulders of the one-eyed god Odin. His companions and his spies, the birds fly around the world each day and report back to their master, whispering their findings in his ear. So we have this amazing old illustration of Odin. You can see his one eye, and he's got Hunin and Munin on his shoulders, whispering their finds into his ear. The raven's association with Odin, considered the father of the Norse gods, suggests an immense respect for the bird's wisdom, but it also acknowledges its role as a scavenger. Like Odin, the god of war, the raven can be ruthless, circling over battlefields and scavenging for prey. So, a lot of soldiers would often report ravens following them into battle in olden times just because they knew they would have a good meal afterwards. It's a little dark, but I think the dark and interesting things are the most fascinating ones in the book. And of course, another illustration I did relatively early on for the book was the magpie. And I absolutely love this. Comes from this 18th century British nursery rhyme. They have a meaning of prophecy. And, they're a corvid, they're like crows and ravens. So they're known for their intelligence, their call, and their association with superstition. And so the nursery rhyme is called One for Sorrow. It's a British nursery rhyme. In modern versions, we say one for sorrow, two for joy, three for a girl, four for a boy, five for silver, six for gold, seven for a secret never to be told. But here I've included what I hope to include in the book, but unfortunately, we've got pretty short page lengths in the book, so I couldn't include the original Victorian nursery rhyme, but it would go one for sorrow, two for luck or mirth, three for a wedding, four for death or a birth, four or five for silver, six for gold, seven for a secret not to be told, eight for heaven, nine for hell, which in the very Victorian style has been bleeped. And nine for the devil's own cell. Devil also bleeped, which is so very Victorian and really kind of fun. I just love the Victorian era, this like outward displays of affection and emotion and cursing, things like that were improper. And so you would do things like this or use flowers to communicate. It's so fascinating. This one I just had to include because I love finches and, I love seeing little finches at my feeder. And so I had to include the goldfinch. And so I chose to do the New World goldfinch versus the Old World. But, the meanings for these birds, where there's some Old World and New World species, really tend to overlap, which is interesting, because they are visually similar and also similar in terms of personality and behavior, but are not actually related. And they have a meaning of domesticity and appreciated for their charming feathers and joyous chirps. Finches have long been kept as pets. Dexterous creatures, they can be taught to perform tricks such as ringing a bell or lifting a small bucket of food or water on a string. Goldfinches, in particular, appear frequently in Renaissance depictions of the Madonna and Child. They were a favorite household pet at the time and often given to children. So I included a couple examples of paintings that I've seen in real life, which is really exciting that I photographed to share with you. And, the first one is of a De Medici baby, and the De Medicis were a very famous Florentine banking family. They're incredibly wealthy. And so their son would, of course, have the most fashionable pet at the time, which is a goldfinch. And I really love how in both of these, the baby is really like grabbing onto the goldfinch, and they seem to be fine with it, but maybe they're not for babies to hold on to and play with, but it was very trendy at the time. Maybe we've learned from then. And I also just really love this Crivelli painting. I just really love, his technique and the way that he approaches the illustrations. And I love the child, Madonna and Child with a little finch in his hands. Very sweet. Yeah, maybe not the best thing, but all of these are, of course, the old world goldfinches. And I, of course, drew the new world since that's what I see at my feeder. Another absolute favorite from this is the rooster. And since I have hens, I had to include the rooster in my book. And they have the meaning of betrayal. An adult male chicken is larger than the female of the species with more brightly colored feathers and a larger red comb atop his head. Known to crow in anticipation of the dawn, the rooster and his call have come to signify daybreak. Though his sunrise greeting lends the rooster a mostly cheerful reputation, the bird is also associated with betrayal. All four canonical gospels tell of Jesus' prediction at the Last Supper that his disciple Peter would betray him 3 times before the rooster crows. Indeed, Peter did deny Jesus in the lead up to the crucifixion. So, in the 9th century, Pope Nicholas I decreed that a rooster be placed atop every church in Europe as a reminder of the betrayal. Because weather vanes were already present atop most church steeples, roosters were added on top of the devices, creating the now ubiquitous weathercock. The oldest surviving weathercock, the Gallo di Ramperto, was installed around the year 820 atop a bell tower in a church in Brescia, Italy. And so this is the oldest surviving weathercock, a photo of it. Isn't it fascinating? It's so beautiful. It feels like very modern art, even though it was created back in the year 820. And I think it's definitely created by somebody who liked roosters and appreciated how funny they are. It has a sense of humor to it and a bit of whimsy. And I think it's really beautiful. And I had to include it just because it's such a fascinating visual. And there's so many birds in this book that have these little icons and stories that go along with them that have cool visuals. Um, my favorite, of course, being the pelican. And this is definitely the strangest, I would say, of all of the birds in the book and the most surprising story to me when I was doing research. And they have a meaning of duty. And the fascinating lore of these water birds can be traced to the Physiologus, an educational Christian text compiled in the 3rd century by an unknown Greek author. It states that pelicans kill their young in frustration, then revive them in their remorse using their own blood. The Physiologus goes on to describe this as an allegory for the resurrection of Jesus. So we think that perhaps this wasn't a misunderstanding of how pelicans actually feed their young. They regurgitate food from the pouch under their bill, pressing it against their chest to empty it completely. And the result is a bloody looking mess. Medieval Christians modified this understanding, believing that in her intense devotion, the pelican mother would wound her own breast to feed her young with her own blood. So I pulled some really fascinating artwork that features this symbolism. The more you think about it, the more you see it, it pops up everywhere, which is so funny to me. It's such a bizarre and interesting and intriguing symbol. So we have an old medieval bestiary here at the top where the pelican mother is wounding her chest and reviving them. She's killing them first, then wounding herself and reviving them. So funny to me. I just think this is hilarious and disturbing. And what's interesting is that the Physiologus, this second century, third century Greek text, is the inspiration behind a lot of medieval bestiaries. So a lot of the stories that they tell about things like dragons and also pelicans are from this strange little moralistic tale, book of moralistic tales. And we have this amazing altarpiece of the crucified Christ, and you can see this in the Uffizi Museum in Florence. And so I was working on this book when I was visiting Italy, and I went into the Uffizi. Of course, I can't resist going to an art museum wherever I go. And I saw this and I looked at it and I thought, that has to be the pelican, right? So I took a picture of it. I took a picture of like the little information about it, and I went on the Uffizi website and I just typed in the word pelican, and this popped up. So it is in fact the pelican from the story, just memorialized in this funny and interesting way. And, Queen Elizabeth I of England even adopted the symbolism of the pelican. So, in this famous portrait by Nicholas Hilliard, which is called the Pelican Portrait, she wears a pelican pendant on her chest. And she was quoted as saying that it was because she was so devoted to her people that she is the pelican mother of the entire country of England, and that she would do anything for them. So, she is, in fact, the pelican mother. And I also had to include this Scottish blood drive poster from World War II, which was encouraging people to give blood, and encouraging blood donations during the war. And it says, "Your blood can save a life." And it has the little pelicans in a soldier's helmet. And I just find it really fascinating that, this iconography of the pelican with the wounded chest feeding its babies from, the third century in Greece has survived to modern day and even influences things like popular culture and media and things like that. And I just think it really goes to show that these strange stories of birds are, just part of our culture, and they're fascinating and admirable and interesting. And then I wanted to share quickly just my process for creating the illustration, since I get a lot of questions about this in general. And everything starts out with a sketch, and I start with just black and white line work. And this really just shows my publisher, the art director and editor, kind of where the illustration is going to fall on the page, what the composition looks like, and it helps me in the next stage. And, I'm very grateful. My publisher really trusts me with these things, and I only really had to make one change when working on this book, which was really great. So here are the black and white sketches. And then from there, I will do a detailed graphite pencil drawing. And this really helps get the texture and some of the shading and just that kind of detail and hand-drawn quality to the work. And then to add color, I digitally paint using Photoshop. So I use a tablet, so it is like actually painting, but it's just done on the computer. And this really lets me change things on the go if I need to. I can take backgrounds out really quickly. And it really brings the illustrations to life. It's more of the shading and the detail and that sort of thing. But we've got the Quetzal and the Lapwing, of course, which are two of my favorite illustrations in the whole book. I've never seen a Quetzal in real life, and it is my like goal to see one day. But I think I just need to travel a bit more to see that beautiful bird. But yeah, that's just my illustration process, and I'm happy to answer questions about this and have our little discussion. So I'll stop my presentation now. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Of course, I had a lot of questions. And as everybody knows, when I do this, I have all my little sticky notes in the book. And I will say that the lapwing, when I saw that, I'm like, I would love to have that like over where I put my sewing machine,
Oh
because
yeah.
it just struck me with the scissors in it. And I have a pair of scissors that look like a little bird.
Yeah,
But
the short scissors. I love those.
yep, yep. So gosh, I have lots of questions, and I see questions and comments, so I want to make sure I get to folks that are joining us tonight. Jen says that she works at a zoo, and flamingos are a species that they plan to bring in. And she was showing this entry to the zoo director, and he was intrigued.
Ooh.
So, Jen, I don't know if you want to come on. There you are. Jen, do you want to come on and tell us a little bit more about like what motivated you to take, I mean, like take this book and say, oh, look, here's the book. Is there a story there, Jen?
There isn't really in particular. Like I said, we're all aware of down the road, not far, but not close, to hopefully get Chilean flamingos. And so when I saw it and I mean, it was fascinating. I'm like, what? Like the Phoenix, like the story of the Phoenix could be coming from these? It was like mind blowing. So, um, the first I don't have, the flamingo is a bird that a lot of people really love and have all the clothes and stuff, but I don't really know anyone like that. So the first person who came to mind was the director of the zoo. So I was like, well, I'll share it with him. And yeah, he was like, what? Same reaction. So thank you for that. It was really cool.
Yeah. I love flamingos.
Excellent.
They're
And
fascinating.
flamingos are a whole lot of fun. And one of the things that I found interesting in your book, Jessica, is that you organize the index not by like alphabetical order. So, if I'm looking for something and like, wait, where is that? You created, and I'm wondering, we have a couple questions about the resources, what resources you use, but I'm curious why you did the index this way. What was your thought process related to that? And
Yeah,
then we're
so
going to get back to the resources questions.
definitely. Yeah, that's fun to talk about too, because they're interesting. But yeah, so the index of Floriography, my Victorian flower book, is organized that way. And the thought process behind that one was if you are making a bouquet, you might want to go according to theme with the flowers. So flowers for affection, flowers for a lover, flowers for a friend, that kind of thing. So we just decided, why not do the same thing with birds? So it seemed like a good idea at the time. So because the book is already organized alphabetically, I thought, it could be interesting, right? If you're using this as a resource to think about, oh, I want to give like a bird themed present to someone, or it's particularly helpful with artists if they wanted to use it a bird with a particular meaning in an illustration or a painting. That's always where my mind would go to first. And I've heard from some authors that they've used it as a reference to try to pull from. And so I think it's an interesting way of organizing things, right, by category versus, any other thing that maybe is a bit more logical but less whimsical.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I like it. Um, so let's talk about resources a little bit. So we've got a couple folks that have asked about resources. So Pamela is asking, in addition to your impressive portraits, um, and calls your book beautiful, but what resources did you access for the meanings? Like, wow. And I'll just preface that a little bit with we've, as I look at birds, you had a few different things than I would have thought of, like the bluebird. And let's see, that bluebird's on page 14, I think that is, for those of you that have the book in front of you. But the bluebird, I always think of the bluebird as being the bluebird of happiness.
Mhm.
And so you've got the bluebird patience and hope, and you tell a little bit different of a story. So as you were doing your research and looking at your resources for the meanings, how come the bluebird isn't the bluebird of happiness and you got it as something else? What's up with that?
So it's interesting. With any of the resources that I'm using, I want to find like real scholarly articles about that. And so a lot of things that we say, like the bluebird, I've heard a lot about people saying that cardinals are, visitors from beyond coming to visit, and that they were surprised that that wasn't the meaning in the book. And it's mostly because I can't really find anything scholarly about that and the reasoning behind it. And so I tried to pull from things like history, mythology, folklore, and in general, I try to quote the source in it. So I think this one is from like a French fairy tale, the story of the bluebird. It comes from that, which is it's a very kind of sad story, which a lot of them are. A lot of fairy tales are dark and strange. But yeah, I try to like cite it within the text so that people can go and look that up later if they want to read the whole story instead of just my summary. But yeah, it's interesting. It was hard to find anything for cardinals being like spirits of our loved ones coming to visit. It's just, for a lot of these things, they just have to be recorded somewhere. And a lot of things that are told through like oral tradition and things like that haven't been. So I know when I'm pulling from things like Native American legends and mythology, I always try to find books and sources like that that would relate to it. There's a lot of fantastic children's books written by Native American authors and illustrated as well. And those are really excellent resources too for hearing about these stories firsthand that maybe hadn't been recorded before in a way like that. Um, I've also used things like Pliny the Elder has a book about animals that's been translated into English. And like, if I have to read that book one more time, I think I'm going to lose my mind because it's so dense and it's so bizarre. There's lots of bizarre Pliny the Elder and Aristotle bird lore and stories. And so, yeah, it just kind of goes you just kind of dig up and see what you can find for each one. And I definitely tend to choose stories that I personally find are interesting too. So if there's maybe like two or three stories that have different meanings, I'll kind of pick and see what have we covered, what have we not talked about before.
I love it.
Mhm.
And so I want to make sure that we just kind of touch on some of the chat. It's more chatty than questions, but and somebody is asking about books, and we'll get to that at the end. We'll talk about availability of your books toward the end. But I just want to point out Pam, and I find this in a lot of situations, but Pam says, I saw magpies for the first time ever in New Mexico, and she didn't know about them before that trip. And I think that's what's fascinating. And when you talk about the magpies, it so often in your book, as I was reading these, I'm like, I mean, I've been around birds since I was a kid and doing bird stuff. My dad used to drag his students out on bird field trips, and my mother would always say, you are taking the children with you, aren't you? So we had to go on field trips with my dad when he was taking his students watching. But things like, the blue jay, page 12, for those of you that do have the book, you tell a story about the blue jay, and I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to look at a blue jay the same way anymore. So I always think about blue jays as in the fall, the young male blue jays kind of gang together and kind of a ruckusy, and I always think of them as a gang, just kind of causing trouble until they grow up and mature a little bit. But you have like a whole totally different story in here about blue jays, as you do with the bittern.
Yeah.
So for those of you that are bird watchers and can hear the sounds, it's I had to laugh because the bittern on page 8, um, you talk about associating it with a graveyard creature that has this distinguishing screech.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, the heron and also the egret and other birds like the bittern have those weird squawky kind of things. But as a bird watcher, I don't look at it negatively. I'm like, oh, a bittern. And so once again,
Yeah.
I'm thinking, oh, am I going to be thinking about a graveyard every time I hear a heron screech?
Yeah, isn't that interesting? It's like so many of the meanings tend to be associated with the calls of the birds, which I find really fascinating. And as I was working on this, especially working on the illustration side of things, I'd always look up the bird's call to make sure, it was kind of captured in the artwork. So I tried to make the bittern artwork like a little spooky for that. And it's mentioned in The Hounds of Baskerville too, which I think is funny. So yeah, that booming call is perhaps the noise of the hound. It's posited. So yeah.
Yeah. And what's interesting about bird sounds is frequently, I love the connection that you make in a lot of your stories with the sounds of the birds and the actions with the birds. But for those of you that are, birders out there and watching a movie and you hear a bird sound, like, okay, wait a minute, a loon is not going to be found in that area where, wherever it is, just has a great sound to it. And I thought about that as the graveyard, what are they using, in graveyards that might not actually be there. So, we've got some identification, the quetzal and the lapwing. I saw lapwings, hundreds of lapwings when I was in Colombia. But Costa Rica, somebody saw the quetzal in Costa Rica. So
Yeah.
Jessica, it sounds like you're going to have to do a little more research for some books and get out to a couple places where you're going to be able to see these birds.
I've always wanted to like hold a sloth too, so I feel like Costa Rica would definitely be the place for that.
Yes, yes. I would love to just, see a show of hands. How many of you all have been outside of the United States seeing some of these birds that Jessica has in her book? Because she's not just focused on North American birds. So you can do like a reaction or show yourself on camera. I see a bunch of thumbs up. I see some reactions. So it's fascinating to be able to see these. And then folks are asking if we can share the chat, and we're not going to be able to share the chat. This is being recorded, and you can come back and at least hear the conversation. And then Lauren has put some information about links where you can get additional fun stuff that Jessica has done. And then let's see. I'm horrible at names. Rodrigo Augustine is asking, what was the birds that impulsed you to write this book? So what was your motivation for writing this book?
I think
What bird in particular?
the magpie. Yeah, the first time I heard the nursery rhyme One for Sorrow, I just thought that it was so beautiful and so strange, that I've done several illustrations since I've heard about it in college. And I've done several illustrations since then, inspired by it, just with different numbers of magpies that pop up. There was one in my college portfolio that was Two for Joy was the title of the piece, and then there's a One for Sorrow illustration I did a few years ago, of one magpie. And I just find that story so fascinating and so interesting. And I thought to myself, magpie's prophecy, if we're talking about like fortune telling and birds having certain symbols behind them, symbolism behind them, why not explore that further? And so through that, I really found so many other stories, about all the different kinds of birds. But yeah, the magpie is definitely the spark for the book.
I love that. Um, Gosh, you get lots of discussion going on in here. And Rodrigo Augustin, I'm not saying your name very well. I love her background. She's got this beautiful, is that a black and white warbler or what is that?
Yes,
Do
it's
you
a
want to do?
yes, it's a black and white warbler.
Oh, so cool.
Excellent. Did you have another question or another thought related to your question that you want to ask, Jessica?
No, it was really interesting the book. I really want to buy it, and I'm so excited to see it more. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, very cool. So Monique is asking, is the belted kingfisher in the book?
There's a regular kingfisher. So it's just the kingfisher in general. I think for a lot of them, we don't really get super specific, except for maybe the little owl, is called out in particular just because it has, it's associated with Athena, and I love to talk about Athena. I have my little owl pendant on, which is like an Athenian coin reproduction. It has a little owl on it. But yeah, that's the only one I think we're getting more like species specific, other than just, kingfishers in general. But I love kingfishers. They're so beautiful.
Yeah, they really are. And just to watch them do their whole fishing thing. Um, Gosh, we could probably talk about these stories for a long time, but I did, um, as I was reading through this and I was looking, and we kind of talked about this a little bit, the differences in stories that we've heard. And you have the kookaburra in the story, and of course I always want to sing the song every time I see a kookaburra, or every time I see one on a page anywhere. But when you were writing this book, were there things that you wanted to do that you really kind of weren't able to do?
Yeah, so for the Kookaburra, I wanted to include the song that we all sing, that we all know about the Kookaburra and the gum tree. But that is actually still under copyright. And so you can't reproduce the lyrics of it in the book without paying for the right to do so. So I couldn't include that. And then there are a lot of things that got cut down quite a bit. Just because, the pages are small, like we can't include that much information on it. So there were a lot of pages. I think the swan we had to cut down considerably, as well as the duck entry. And it kind of makes me a little sad because I do enjoy the writing process of it, and editing it is so difficult. It's the worst part, to have to be like, oh, but this, it feels important. Like I want to include it. I want to figure out a way to include it. And so I think sometimes like in the presentation, it's easier to include all the facts and things. Like even the Scottish blood drive poster is cut from the actual entry in the book, but it's so cool that I had to share it.
Well, it's great that you have the opportunity to share it, and especially with us, for those of us that are kind of bird nerdy and want to hear all the details and everything that you were thinking and all of the stuff that got left out. And I know that when I was writing a book, I kind of fought with the publisher and the editor a little bit about, no, I think that's really important to keep in, or, oh, that's a good story, or, no, I don't want to use that picture. And so one of the things that I found interesting in your book is that you've got a lot of things in here. As I mentioned, some stories that I like, the bluebird, I didn't, the bluebird of happiness, and you explained why that, why you went with your other story. But like, even like the cuckoo and the coot and the loon, we say things like, oh, he's a loony, he's loony. I don't think of loons as being loony at all, but it just kind of rhymes. And then the cuckoo, he's cuckoo, and the coot, like old coot. But you don't talk about those in here.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. For some of them, I know, I'm pretty sure the crazy as a loon um comes from the loon's call, that it, like, people think it's funny or nuts, and so there were so many birds in the book already where we talk about their call, like the warbler, or the bittern and things like that. And so I thought, it might be a little bit more interesting to tell a story that maybe people haven't heard as much. And a lot of times when I'm working on this, especially with my editor, we'll go back and forth on the meanings and things behind them. And sometimes she'll be like, this is too mean. Like it has to be, it has to be nicer. And I was like, it's a good point. It's true. And I'm glad she calls me out on things like that. Because she'll be like, we shouldn't say, like, we shouldn't have necessarily like a mean meaning for like the harpy eagle, right? Because it's not their fault that they're getting these associations. It's the fault of like the humans who are interacting with them and coming up with these things. And it's like, you know what? She's right. That's true. And so, you kind of want to do these birds justice, and maybe loons have a more interesting story to tell, and just with a different tale that maybe people hadn't heard as much before.
Yeah, I love that. And Pamela Olander also pointed that out. She said it was interesting that you didn't necessarily use classic adjectives, for like wise owl and bluebird of happiness, etc. So,
Yeah.
so it is fun learning new things and hearing new things. And I'm sorry, but the Blue Jays, I'm just not going to be able to look at them the same. So, um, we've only got a few minutes left, and I want to make sure, if anybody has last minute questions, I want to make sure that we do address the where you can find your book. I just think this would make a great gift for somebody who's into birds. And I think it'd be a great school book, like, to give
Yeah.
to a classroom that is interested in learning some stories and lore about birds. So I want to make sure we address that. And then we had a question, a general question, not specific to your book, but because these are so fun to do, you're going to have to write a new book so that we can have you back on into our club. But yes, we are continuing the Bird Book Club in 2026. We've got some exciting lineups. And then, let's see. I just want to make sure I don't miss anything. Somebody did ask when I mentioned Colombia. I'm going to be giving a talk about my Colombia trip, so look for that. It was actually fascinating. And Jessica, as I was thinking about some of the stories that you shared and some of the artwork that you've done, fascinating artwork. And I love hearing you talk about, oh, well, I have to go to the art museum. And I'm like, well, you guys see that? Can't you see her like, oh, well, I have to go to that art museum. Oh, I have to go to that art museum. But, there's certainly Environment for the Americas also offers trips. There's one coming up in Cuba. It may be full, but there might be a seat or two that can be added. But talk about flamingos. The last time I went with Environment for the Americas to Cuba, we saw hundreds of flamingos. And it does change your perspective of birds when you see them like that. And your book has really changed my perspective of some of the birds because of the cool stories that you've shared with us. So thank you so much for being our guest this evening. And thank you all for joining us this evening on the Environment for the Americas Bird Book Club. It is just so great having everybody reading about birds, thinking about birds, and yearning for more. So Jessica, any last minute words of wisdom for us before we end our Bird Book Club tonight?
Oh, that's such a great question. I think just the next time you see some birds on your feeder, you're out exploring and you see a new bird, just kind of think about the message it might have for you. Because I think in kind of an interesting way, birds are great symbols of different things, and it could just be something that you can incorporate in your life. Like if you see a flamingo, you can think about strength, or if see a blue jay, you can, think about their maybe not so great meaning. Working on this book was interesting because I did find out a lot of people have very strong opinions about certain birds that I don't necessarily share. A lot of mockingbird haters out there. But so personally, I just think birds all have lovely messages for us, and we should just be paying attention to them. And I think what's so great about birders is that they already do that so much, and it's a really beautiful kind of act to be out in nature and seeing them.
Yeah, I love it. Well, thank you so much for sharing your time and your energy and your art and your creativity and your stories. This was fascinating. And we'll look forward to your next book. And I will have to say that, flamingos are going to be one of my new fun birds that I'm going to think a little bit more about, that strength. And you certainly have the strength of your creative stories, your creative art, and just absolutely fascinating. So thank you so much again for joining us. Thank you, everybody. And we will see you next month on November the 20th for the next Bird Book Club. Super excited about that one. And everybody have a great evening. Thank you again, Jessica, so much. You are so talented, and we enjoyed having you with us this evening.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Have a nice night.